Thank you very much, everyone, for logging in. My name is Alfredo Clamerotti. I'm the president of the IKT, and we are hosting now the third webinar of the first series of Open Call that we did last year. I think we launched it. So there are 4 webinars in all, and this is the third one, and the next one it will be in January. So I'm very pleased to introduce KJ Baisa, Cohen Jeff Baisa, who actually proposed and organized and was selected to run this webinar, which is titled Longing Belonging, Just Places, Strategies of Repatriation, as you can see on the screen. So I'll pass the word to KJ for his run-up introduction and kick off this exciting seminar. Thank you, KJ.
Great, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. All right, I'm gonna just cue Carolina for the next slide. So this is an abbreviated intro because I want to have time for speakers and discussion. And also this is being recorded, so if you want to refer to it later, this can be great. Next, please. I think the bios were posted on our 3 speakers, Christos, Roshan, and Allison, so we can refer to that, and their contact information is there as well. Next, please. So I just want to go over like the definition and goals. So I'm not going to read everything, but just that repatriation is a complex issue. And I wanted to identify one of the goals, databases that are available, talking about aiding contemporary art curators and organizing exhibitions, and then being aware of technological innovations that are available now. Next, please. Next, please. So there are things in the news that come up, and I found these fairly recently. So this is something that was discovered at a high-end art fair in Maastricht in the Netherlands. Next, please. The return of certain historical artifacts, from Indonesia by the Dutch government. Next. And this is something that Allison is familiar with as well, of the repatriation of Native American remains and the NAGPRA program. Next, please. Also, I'm from Hawaii, so this is especially important to me. So these items in 2024 at UC Berkeley were returned back to Hawaii. Next, please. We have an island called Kaho'olawe that was used as a bombing center for the military, and there are a lot of artifacts that haven't been recovered. So that's one of the issues in terms of recovering places. They have live ordnance, and also the fact that the funding has been decreased. So those are hampering repatriation efforts there. Next, please. So the origins we talked about, like the Wunderkammer, the Cabinet of Curiosities, these are mainly from imperial European expansion, and these are a lot of looted and stolen cultural objects. Next, please. So the 2 prominent cases that people most familiar with are the Parthenon marbles at the British Museum. They were taken, when Greece was under Turkish occupation. Next, please. And then Benin bronzes. So they were looted in the 1897 expedition, and they're scattered through several museum and other institutions around the world. Next, please. So there's certain, contested issues, these are only several of them, like does repatriating Benin bronzes reward slavery? Because some people are saying there are slave trade relics being returned to the heirs of slave trade. And one of the other issues that comes up is that upon repatriation, will the objects be cared for and protected and preserved properly? Next, please. So there's certain approaches to replacing these. So one would be, an example would be the ghost dance shirt taken from the Wounded Knee Massacre in Lakota Nation. And they were repatriated to the Native Nation, and a tribal member made a replacement and presented it to the museum. Next, please. There's also a resin facsimile that was given to the museum, by the museum, when it was repatriated to Nigeria. It's a handmade resin facsimile of something that was repatriated. Next, please. And there are different approaches. I was just at the Acropolis like 12 days ago. So there's this hologram of the goddess Athena. Next, please. The Buddhas that were destroyed in 2001. Next, please. A Chinese couple in 2015 used 3D projection technology to reintroduce or to reimagine the Buddhas as they were. Next, please. And in 2021, the local organizers did the same thing. Next, please. So looking at resources, there's a digital Acropolis Museum with the website there, but these are use of digital photo imaging. Next, please. There's also this virtual museum of still and cultural objects with that reference as well. Next, please. There's a MAC in Germany that has a digital Benin project, again, bringing these together technologically. Next, please. And Rashan can talk about this as well, because he did create this global Nepali museum with other people. Next, please. And there's also a resource for Native and Indigenous communities to create a website and also sourcing for other people. So this is another reference point. I gave some samples of the curatorship. So if we chose some objects, these are from the Benin bronzes. Next, please. If we look at different approach by the museum, so Denver Art Museum repatriated their objects back to Nigeria, but they kept one as an agreement between the government and the museum to keep on loan as a cultural ambassador. Next, please. There's also the establishment of this new Museum of Western African Art, and they make the comment that they want to not merely exist as a receptacle for certain objects and Western magnanimity, but a foundation, place to rebuild opportunities and restoring systems for West African art. Next, please. Oops. The other is this Penn Museum in Philadelphia. They still have some Benin bronzes that are still under negotiations, but I think the things to point out would be that they're acknowledging the looting, that's part of the exhibition, but also they have contemporary African diaspora artists that are showing at the same time. Next, please. And so an example of one artist would be Victor Akamanamor, this Nigerian-American artist who uses his heritage and extensively in his artwork, reflecting the African diaspora and post-colonial politics. Next, please. And new technology, this is a Traveling Treasures project in Liberia, in which the students are able to use AR and VR to experience cultural objects that have been lost by their culture. Next, please. And then gaming technology. There's two things to gaming technology you can use. One is called Luti, in which you can actually repatriate through AR objects, like the Rosetta Stone you can bring back into Egypt through your digital technology. Next, there's another game called Relooted that allows you to repatriate African artifacts by looting Western museums. And it's a pay-to-play with the link there. Next, please. And then the role of AI that can be discussed further, but image recognition and provenance research, and they're using things like LiDAR for monitoring looted sites. Next, please. And I went really quickly so we can go on to the speakers, but it's this is being recorded as well, so thank you. Trying to practice my Greek since I was there. So Sas Efharisto, thank you. All right, let's move on to Christos, and then Rashan, then Allison, and then the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, KJ.
Sure.
I'm gonna share my screen now. Please let me know that you can see it in full growth. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm very honored to be invited and share with you some of the cases that I worked on as mere examples, and I selected these few examples in order to highlight different things that maybe will prompt some discussions afterwards in the Q&A. After first setting the context of this research and understanding historically how we found ourselves in this kind of research regarding antiquities, illicit antiquities, trafficking of antiquities, and then repatriation of antiquities, and examining and researching the international trade in trafficked antiquities. It doesn't seem to want to change the image for some reason. No. Okay, but we did it here. Has it changed for you?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So, first of all, this is an example of looted facade from a Mesoamerican site somewhere in the jungle in Mexico back in the 1960s. And you see one of the looters while cutting with a saw the facade, part of the facade, this amazing facade of a temple, of Mayan temple, ended up in a bit more than 60 wooden crates and shipped by the looters and the trafficker involved as a middleman to the basement and the laboratory of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where it was, of course, intended to be acquired and exhibited. And the restoration laboratory started working on putting it back together in order to be exhibited. However, news appeared, came to Mexican authorities who claimed the facade while still in the restoration laboratory of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and successfully managed to repatriate it to Mexico. This is just a selected example to say that this and all the cases until then, vastly until 1995, were treated in isolation and not as part of the existence of an international trafficking network that through which objects looted from all around the world were being trafficked. Therefore, we had extremely limited knowledge about how these things were being stolen, cross-borders, trafficked, sold with papers, with fake documentation, fake provenance, or very vague one, deliberately omitted, enlarged, and so on. We were assuming, of course, the existence of trafficking networks, but we didn't have solid evidence in amounts that allowed us to research this area. So we were basically in the dark. And that stopped in 1995 when chiefly the Italian authorities, in collaboration with the Swiss, the American authorities, but also independently the Greek authorities in the first place, and then in collaboration with the Italian authorities mainly, raided various members of the trafficking of the trade, the international trade in antiquities, based on few information that they had. And not only they confiscated tens of thousands of antiquities, but mainly they confiscated each one's photographic archives and document archives that accompanied these tens of thousands of photographs. And this was the real treasure, not the objects really that they were found, unsold and repatriated to the various countries of origin, but these archives of objects mainly sold already and trying for us as forensic archaeologists hired by the legal authorities to try and search and identify these objects throughout the world, contribute to their repatriation as we did, and mainly through that amazing photographic and evidence treasure to start to understand for the first time with a massive amount of evidence to shed light into the true nature of the international trade in antiquities. And this was owed mainly to the pioneers. You see on the top the late Paolo Giorgio Ferri, the prosecutor, Italian prosecutor, who overseed these operations for about 2 decades, and the late also, unfortunately, General Roberto Conforti, who was at the time the head of the Carabinieri TPC, the art squad in Italy. And you see at the left the 2 forensic archaeologists, the pioneers in this sense of research of archaeology in its forensic search when it comes to illicit antiquities, Maurizio Pellegrini and Daniela Riccio, here photographed in the gardens of the villa of the Getty Villa in Malibu in Los Angeles, when they went with a camera that you see that is holding Maurizio in his hand to record at the time the exhibition, the permanent exhibition of the Getty Museum, in order to start then check and identify and matching objects from the looters' archives that they have been confiscated since 1995. This information was shared to us. Actually, we exchanged with Greece. I was then working with late prosecutor, Greek prosecutor Ioannis Diotis, that you see under the same umbrella with Paolo Giorgio Ferri, and started the wonderful cooperation since 2006 between the 3 of us, myself, Maurizio Pellegrini, and Daniela Riccio, which was an honor of mine, and we still continue 20 years later to cooperate in this kind of research, having identified hundreds of antiquities that were returned to Italy, based first on networks that we are analyzing. Here is the famous organigram, the handwritten note that was discovered by the Carabinieri in the center of Rome in 1994 for the first time, presenting, demonstrating from the horse's mouth, written by a looter, and this is a transcription depicting the Italian branch of the international trafficking network in antiquities. You see the different cordatas, one by Gianfranco Becchina, the other by Giacomo Medici, and then vertically downwards, going from the middlemen and the looters, and also the places where the looters were operating in Italy, and in between how the head of this international trafficking network at the time, Robert Hecht, you see the American illicit antiquities dealer, was supplied also by other middlemen and dealers like Kutulakis, Ortiz, Frida Tsakos, Eli Borowski, among many others. This created the first wave of repatriations that proved to involve all the major museums around the world, the most famous, the most wealthy, but also university museums that were supposed to have much higher ethical standards in acquisition. They proved that they weren't, they didn't have. Also the top galleries of antiquities around the world, the top private collections, and the top auction houses and dealers' galleries, as you see, auction houses like Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonham's, they were all involved. The raids and the confiscations are still taking place, and they will take place. Italy especially will continue to repatriate objects in the coming years or decades owned to the work of Maurizio Pellegrini, Daniela Riccio, but also of the work separately of their authorities as well, as in a lesser degree other countries like Greece, Egypt, Near Eastern and Middle Eastern countries, among many others. Here I have selected, as I told you before, few cases only. One from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, when it presented that announced that we'll start to researching the private collection of their former chief curator of antiquities, Dietrich von Bothmer, who put together his private collection of fragmented Greek vases. He was the world authority on Athenian pottery. An obvious conflict of interest, since he also was buying from the same sources that the museum was buying at the time, and he was storing his private collection in the office in the museum as well. When he died, he bequeathed his collections to the museum, and the museum randomly in February 2013 randomly decided to accompany the announcement of the start of the research in these fragmented vases with taking randomly two photos, opening a shelf. And one of these two photos was this one that you see, a fragmented cup, 5th century BC, red figure by the Oeveon painter, as it is known. At the time, it was unattributed, but I was searching another cup by the same painter, and it was obvious that it was from the same hand, although it is unsigned, and it is indeed by the Oeveon painter. I was drawn by the fact that the rhomboid piece, the central rhomboid piece was missing. It was obvious from the rest of the pieces, as you see at the left, to the left, that there is a satyr with a menad, a satyr with a tail, as you see, and the menad holding a thyrsus, but in between them there is the base of a large vase. I thought, because of the research I was doing to the other cup, that I have seen something similar, the fragment that is missing somewhere else. And indeed, you see to the right, I found the fragment that was missing, and that was 100 years already in the possession of the Villa Giulia Museum, which is in the National Etruscan Museum in the center of Rome, of Italy. And it was published in the beginning of 1920s because a contessa, Francesca Parignoli Noli, who had the big estate at the outskirts of Rome, one day delivered some of the fragments, among which this one and a few small vases, because her gardeners have found it during gardening her estate garden. And she thought that this shouldn't belong to her, but because it was already back then understood that this is the property of all the Italian people and all the people, she should deliver it as she did to the Villa Giulia Museum. And a few years later, that happened in 1913, a few years later, in the beginning of 1920s, Villa Giulia Museum published that fragment and the other fragments, and that's how I found it. And actually it matches. Let me see if change. Here it is. And that proves that the rest of the fragments came also from Italy, and that the vase belonged to Italy. It had to be repatriated to Italy. I notified the Metropolitan Museum of Art by asking any information in the files of the object, sending an email. That is February 2013. I never received an answer. I notified the Italian Ministry of Culture, of course, Maurizio Pellegrini and Daniela Riccio. At the time, they were still the Villa Giulia Museum. Now they are retired. And by July 2013, the rest of the fragments were back to Italy silently. The Metropolitan Museum didn't make any announcement and never replied to my emails. In 2014, I published the case with Professor David Gill, the International Journal of Cultural Property, as you see, as an excuse to start researching the entire collection of Dietrich von Bothmer in fragmented vases. Since then, many repatriations have taken place to Italy because of this research in this collection of Dietrich von Bothmer, also by the Italian authorities independently. I'm staying in the Metropolitan Museum of Art just to say that this is a different case that I worked on from my PhD, which is unpublished, and I kept it like that. In 2013, I got my PhD in Cambridge. It is restricted information because it includes evidence from these archives to help the authorities first to claim and repatriate their stolen cultural heritage, and then to publish this in its entirety. As such, I was contacted by the Manhattan DA's office in June 2022 to help them with this group of sculptures, figurines of the Dioscuri, Castor and Polydevkis in marble. And I told them that, of course, I know it very well. I have it in my published PhD. I will send you the analysis of the case and all the evidence, and please let me know if being repatriated, I would like to be credited for that, because it's, my unpublished PhD and my work, my sweat, my intellectual property. I sent them everything. They repatriated. They didn't say anything. They presented it as their work only. And this wasn't the first time, and unfortunately it wasn't the last time, because they followed many more cases. But because of that case, I stopped helping for free anyway, the DA's office in Manhattan. And I published the case in The Guardian, exclusively saying that enough is enough. This has happened so many times, not only to me, but to other researchers, as I found out later that I have been contacted because of this time that I complained publicly. Also, in the same case, it was involved a figurine from the private collection of Selby White. And there was no comment by the DA's office. Of course, I have all the emails that prove the thing. And unfortunately, there was no further research by the relevant authorities. Although other colleagues of mine have contacted me because of this publication to say that they had similar experiences. Repeated offenders, private collectors, as I said, Selby White here, a philanthropist with a medal, but actually many times have given back stolen objects from her collection that proved to be stolen. First, whitewashed and laundered after was presented for exhibition as a loan exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1990. The latest of the many separate repatriations to Greece, to Italy, to China, to many other countries involved the raid that took place in her apartment in Manhattan by the DA's office and the Homeland Security investigations. I contributed with Maurizio Pellegrini and Daniela Riccio to also to identifications from the archives of this raid. You see some of the examples that have been repatriated. The figurine you saw at the upper right to Yemen, from the archive of Robin Symes and Christos Michailidis that you see below it. And finally, to close and connecting something with what KJ mentioned before, work on artificial intelligence and image matching. My experience is that there is hope in museum sector, at least. This is the identification from Polaroids from the Medici archive to the left, and you see the same vase restored in the collection of the Allard Pearson Museum, the University of Amsterdam, where I published this case in the Dutch and Greek press first, and then academically as an article. And the museum, that university museum, happily surprised me, positively surprised me, because it became the first museum that took it really on the chin. And not only they didn't reply to my emails or being hostile in the replies, like usually I have this kind of reactions by museums found to be involved in this trafficking, but instead the museum have contacted me to cooperate, because they wanted to be clean, to clean their collection. They have a new generation of curators who are much more informed and much more higher ethical standards regarding the collection of the museum they serve. They are not the ones involved in the acquisition of these objects. They understand the current debates about these issues, and they also hired me as a provenance researcher and a fellow in the museum, where I made more identifications. They are due to be announced, but the main point is that the museum now is transparent. They are publishing themselves the cases of illicit antiquities in making their own internal museum journal, and also they are updating the labels in their permanent exhibition, and most importantly, they initiate themselves the repatriate and the contact with the authorities for the repatriation of the objects, and are not waiting like the other museums to be knocked their doors by the authorities themselves, which is a huge difference to what we have experienced the last 20 years internationally. I very much hope that this will be followed as an example by other museums, but now I have applied to the European Research Council, the ERC, for funding in order to create an algorithm which will compare the Traffickers Archives images that we have with the entire museum collections images of various museums within Europe to start with. And therefore to have accurate but very fast and many identification of objects, not for the sake of repatriation only, which is the subject of our presentation here, but mainly for understanding furthermore the way objects were trafficked from all over the world, but ended up in European museums in the first instance. And hopefully we will be successful, but we have to wait 3 more weeks to find out, apparently. So thank you so much for the invitation. This is my email address for anyone who would like privately to contact me after the webinar with any kind of questions or ideas or anything that they would like to discuss privately. But otherwise, I'm really available to answer any questions from all of you, and I'm really looking forward to that and to the presentations of the other 2 esteemed colleagues. Thank you.
No, thank you, Christos. Yes, if we hold questions till the Q&A, Roshan, you're up next.
Thank you. Give me 1 sec. Do you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Is it full screen?
Full for me, yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So great. So I'm going to talk about our gods that are leaving the country. Basically, I'm not going to talk about the success story of Nepal Heritage Recovery Campaign. We have repatriated about 150 artifacts from different museums and institutions around the world in the last 4 years since we established ourselves. But I'm going to talk about the absence of the gods, which is basically you go to different, monument sites or ritual spaces in Kathmandu, and then you'll see the gods are missing, just like the image that is actually shown in this cover page. Okay, so if you go around Kathmandu Valley, this is the usual scene you see in Kathmandu. So basically, you'll see many of our gods and goddesses often caged behind bars. And one of the reasons you see this, in Kathmandu is because we're still scared that our gods and goddesses will be stolen and taken away. So this is a precaution that is taken by the community and the local municipality. This is a beautiful, open space in Kathmandu Darbar Square. This is a temple of, Shiva and Parvati. But when you look at this image, you don't feel there is anything missing. It looks complete. It looks beautiful. But when you start looking at, a little bit closer, you see these parts, like all above the doors, you see this semicircular wooden panel. We call it a torana. And you can see that the middle deity, there's an image, wooden deity image in the middle of this torana, and these are all stolen. It's gone. We have not identified anything, but you see the absence of God when you go around Kathmandu Valley. This is one of the very popular space in Kathmandu Darbar Square. It's a home of living goddess in Kathmandu. We call it, it's a Kumari Ghar. And if you look at this central image, you can see the door and you can see the semicircular wooden panel, the torana. And on the right-hand side, where I've got two arrows on each side, you can see that like those toranas were there before, and this has disappeared over the period of time. And if you look at some of these images, if you look at the middle section, you can see that in 1970, all the doors, above all the doors, the toranas were there. Then when you look at, before 2000, you can see 1 and 2 on the right-hand side, that has disappeared. 2007, the third one disappeared, right? 2011, the fourth one disappeared. And by 2021, you can see all of them are there, but these are replicas. So all the original torana that were there in the above the door, that was stolen, and it is all gone outside the country. And we identified 2 of those. One was actually at the Barakat Gallery, which was in London, and that was successfully returned back to Nepal. And the other one, we found it in the private collection, and that is still due to come back. But you can see that, especially in Kathmandu Valley, all our heritage sites are so decorated. You can see, decorated with metals. You can see decorations with wood. You can see the deities. You can see small deities carved in wood, right? And then you can see large stone sculptures within the Darbar Square and the temples as well. And when Nepal was opened in 1950s, until 1950s, Nepal was closed to the rest of the world. When Nepal was open to the 1950s, there was an influx of visitors. The hippies came, all sort of people came, the photographers, artists, historians, anthropologists, all sort of people came, right? But that was around the time when Nepal's heritage was kind of exposed to the West. And since 1950s till 1990s, I would say that 80%, one of the documentary actually, argues that the 80% of our heritage is actually outside the country. And that is a sad reality for the Nepalese people. And when you see images like this is a swimming pool of James and Marlene also. They have got a huge collection of Nepali antiquities. This particular image doesn't probably have any Nepali antiquities, but this is how our ritual gods and goddesses are kept outside the country. They are not gods and goddesses. They're considered as objects in the museums. And for collectors, they're considered as decorative objects. You can find that in the living room, you can find it in a hallway, and you can find it in your garden and wherever there's space in the house. So this is how the Nepali antiquities has actually been, scattered all around the world. And this is just a random image I downloaded from the internet. And this is basically, I'm trying to show the museum storage. And when I look at these museum storages, I've been to several museum storages in different museums around the world. And every time I go there, like when museums argue that they're actually preserving the world's culture and heritage, they're not actually. They're actually hiding it in the storage for God knows how many how many decades. And many museums like British Museum, for example, they have got 8 million objects in their collection. And guess what? They're only displaying 1%, right? So the remaining 99% is actually in the bunker, right? In the storage. It's not there for public to view. It's not there for the people to kind of go and worship. It is completely disconnected from the context of the living culture. So this is a very sad part when I every time I see the storages in the museums. This is an image of a festival. We call it's a Rato Machindranath Jatra. It's a chariot festival that happens in the Kathmandu Valley. And if you think about this sort of festival, this is the living culture, right? Every single piece of wood, every single deity that is actually in the chariot is actually worshipped by the community. And these sort of, festivals can only be run by the communities. But when you think about, people like us, the museum professionals, or people like art historians, if even though they have done so much research, even though they have talked about so much, conservation and preservation, they will never be able to run the festivals. So we need to understand that these festivals, these deities, these devis and devatas, right? They belong to the people, they belong to the community, and they belong to the festival where the constant worship and rituals that needs to happen around them. This is a very important temple in again, Kathmandu Darbar Square. It's known as a Taleju Mandir. It's opened once a year for public to go and worship the goddess. And about 5-6 years back, if you look at the image on the left, that is the necklace of the deity that was identified at the Art Institute of Chicago. And this was about 6 years ago. I think that the case started towards the end of 2020. And then, this has been claimed so many times. There's so many, I think, I would say few conversation that has happened between the Art Institute of Chicago and the Department of Archaeology, but still it has failed to be sent back to the country. There is already an inscription in this necklace, and it proves that the Malla king donated this necklace to the goddess. But recently, when we heard the story about, this jewelries that was stolen from Louvre, that actually hit the headlines immediately, right? It was the Queen's crown, and recently I posted on social media this particular text, where I was comparing the crown of the Queen with the necklace of the deity, and the Queen's crown, that actually hit the headline. But when we claimed the necklace of the deity, that was completely ignored. There was no urgency, there was no outrage, and there's no way of showing justice to the Nepalese community and the Nepalese people, right? And it is a very sad story. And this is something I found it quite interesting when that incident happened in the Louvre. How a museum would look at it when something is stolen from their premises, but they are not looking in the same way if something has been in display within the collection, if that came through the stolen channels, through the illicit trafficking. And it was quite interesting for me to kind of see what was happening in the social media and newspaper. But also at the same time, I remember that two of these stone sculptures, which we claimed from a museum Gume, this was claimed, I think, about 8-9 years ago. And this is still not sent back. This is still with the Museum Gume. And then I see that, like, I was again comparing this story with the crown, and there's no urgency to send it back because, like, we have sent all the in situ images, we have sent all the proofs and all the documentation that was required, but they're still sitting with the museum. And these are some of the artifacts and deities that are still at the Art Institute of Chicago. These are all claimed by the Nepal government, and I hope these are actually in the process of coming back. And I recently heard that Chicago has removed many of the Nepalese, Devis and Devatas, the deities, from the display, including the necklace. So I'm assuming that will turn out in a good news. This is one of the monastery in Patan, and in this monastery, this is the original display within the shrine, and this was around 1970. You can see like 5 of these objects were actually in the shrine for people to worship, for different purposes and rituals. And you can see on the side, those are the fragments that are left behind once all those 5 deities were stolen. But later on, the anonymous Facebook page, Lost Arts of Nepal, identified that all these 5 deities were actually in the different institutes around the world. One was in Art Institute of Chicago, the other one is in Philadelphia. There's a private collection, right? And this is all scattered around in Metropolitan Museum and also Los Angeles County Museum. But once this was out in the social media, the private collector came forward and he did the voluntary return. So that actually, number 3, that actually came back to Nepal. But the other 5 were still awaiting for them to come back. And if you look at the image, the lower image here, this one here, this is how the shrine room looks if you compare that with the old setting, right? So what this is telling me is, like, over the period of time, there is a huge risk that the local community will forget the rituals and the jatras that are connected with the Devis and Devatas that were there before. So this is actually a very sad, case study for us, where everything is actually stolen away from one particular monastery. This is again in Patan Darbar Square. And again, I'm showing one of the torana here. This is the torana. This is above this golden gate within the courtyard. And from this particular torana, 5 of these deities were wrenched out in the middle of night and was stolen from the torana. And later on, this was in June 2021, we saw that in Bonham's auctions. And that was around the time when we recently kind of, started the Nepal Heritage Recovery Campaign. And then we are very excited about, okay, what can be done with these issues. And then we started interacting. There was an article published in the newspaper, and then we started posting that in social media. But within 24 hours, Bonham replied back to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nepal, saying that these objects were withdrawn from sale. It was a very, amazing moment for us. That is, the auction was stopped within 24 hours. But being these objects in France, it was very difficult to get it out from France. So it is still there, and we still have no idea where it is. So these are still missing from the Patan Darbar Square's torana. This is another toll, a small community space where there's a Buddhist monastery, and the name of the space is called Taubaha in Kathmandu. And there's one Padmapani statue. This particular one was found that this was stolen, and it was actually housed in the Ashmolean Museum in the UK. And this was in 2022, I believe, when I was there, and then I was actually taking a photo in front of the Padmapani. And then when in 2021, there was a series of tweets being posted. Initially, it was posted from the Lost Arts of Nepal, who identified the object was actually in Ashmolean Museum. Then Erin Thompson was actually, commenting there. Then Vijay Kumar from India, he was commenting there, because these 3 objects were actually just sitting next to the Nepali objects in the same section, and they're waiting for it to come back. And then he has just mentioned that they have not actually heard anything from last 2 years or something, right? But recently, I think this has actually gone back to India. But whereas the Nepali object is actually still sitting there, they are one of the first public museum in the world. And they are the first university museum, where people will get an opportunity to research and learn about different sort of objects from all around the world. But I just wonder why institutions are not actually, collaborating with the institutions in the home country and then figuring it out how they can actually return these objects back to the community, because all the proofs, all the documentation, everything is actually provided to them. And this is still, again, missing from the community and has not arrived back to Nepal. This particular image, the central image, is actually from the art gallery in New South Wales. This is one of the Avalatokeshwar's image from outside Kathmandu Valley. And this is, again, we are actually in discussion with New South Wales Gallery about the return of these objects. I was there in 2024. I've seen this in the gallery, and then I've met with the curators. And I believe that now what is important is, like, when we have a face-to-face conversation with museum professionals and curators who are actually the custodians of these, deities, I think it is the best way to kind of go forward when you talk about repatriation. And then in the same way, like when we are talking with the New South Wales Gallery, they were able to return one of the strut. And when this was being returned, the director of the museum was there, the curator was there, and even the minister actually came to Nepal for the handover, and it was a wonderful ceremony. And I'm not only talking about, the objects that were stolen from the sites, but I'm also going to point out, there's some deities that were gifted by the kings, and I think this is very important for us to talk about, because these deities were the part of the community, and the community were actually looking after these devis and devatas, for jatras and rituals. They're the one who were worshipping it, and they were the one who were the custodians, right? And I believe that even though it was gifted by the kings, I think if the proof of the space is known, and if it can go back to the original space, I think these museums should actually voluntarily return some of these gifted devis and devatas as well, because it's a huge part of the community, and without these gods and goddesses, some of the functions and some of the rituals may not happen, or it may even disappear over the period of time. So I think it's a very important conversation that we need to have with the institutions. This is another interesting story. I think this is the original in situ image that we could found. And once these were stolen from this space, it was replaced by this mask. So these are actually the mask of Vairava. And later on, these two masks were found, one in the Dallas Museum and one was in the Rubin Museum. And once this was out in the social media, and once people, once we started talking about this, both of the museums were very, supportive, and they actually returned two of these masks back to Nepal, along with other two objects you can see there. And this is quite an interesting case, because this belonged to a Pradhan family, and then we actually having conversation with the Pradhan family. The Department of Archaeology is trying to actually send it back to the original community, where that where the original performance and the worship can actually restart. And this particular image, the one on the left-hand side, this is the image that this is the Lakshmi Narayan's image that we repatriated from the Dallas Museum. And then this was the first object we repatriated from the campaign. And there was a huge celebration once we returned this back. And you can look at you can see the image on the left, the right-hand side. This is how the god looks like. This is how it looked inside the museum, and this is how it looks inside the temple. And then I keep on saying this phrase that we have to let our gods live and die with dignity. What that means is, they were actually created to fulfill a purpose, and we need to allow them to fulfill that purpose. Right? It does not matter whether they deteriorate or whether they break or whether they are covered by, colors or flowers or any other things, right? It's absolutely okay, because that is the best part of the living culture. Because the living culture is all about, you create something, you fulfill the purpose. Once it's degraded or destroyed, the community will build another one and they will replace that. Right? And that should happen. That's the cycle of the living culture. And I think if we want to, preserve the living culture, we also need to make sure that we don't treat our gods and goddesses in the way that we treat in the museums. So if you look at this image, what I mean by living and dying, the dignity process is this one. So this is how it looks when it is in the museum. When it is within the community, this is how it will look. It's colored with, it has got flowers. It's probably losing its contours as well. And over the period of time, it's okay that the deity will completely lose its contour. It may not be, have the original features, but that is the beauty of the living culture. And that is the dignified way of letting these gods and goddesses deteriorate so that the next generation can recreate. And that's why I emphasize more and more on documentation. If our generation are able to kind of document what we have, then we are giving opportunity to the next generation to recreate and perform the same ritual. And that's a very important part, I think, for the living culture. And this is where the Lakshmi Narayan, I was worshiping the Lakshmi Narayan, and then once we see this, different cases and different claims that we are making in different museums, we have now hope that our gods and goddesses will come back. They will come back and they will fill the gaps. They will cover the voids. And I think that is so important for us to happen. We want to restore the faith, the belief, and we want to revive and regenerate the living culture. And that's so important so that we can pass it to the next generation. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I'll look forward to the question and answer if I have missed anything. Thank you.
I'm sure there would be a lot of questions. So, all right, Allison, you're up.
So very quickly, I'm Allison Fisher-Olson. I am the repatriation coordinator for the University of California, Los Angeles campus. And I also am the curator of Native American cultures within the Fowler Museum at UCLA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of one of the challenges that I think my team and others that work within the landscape of Los Angeles on repatriation to Native communities are all kind of navigating. But I'm going to try my best to kind of make some connections back to kind of the other speakers and maybe create some connections back to what they spoke about. But, I would say that doing repatriation through the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act at UCLA, or UC system-wide, but certainly at UCLA's, it's interesting because there are so many layers of law and policy that shape the way that we do this work. The NAGPRA law itself is federal law. And in the state of California, we have a kind of state version of this called California NAGPRA or CalNAGPRA that we are subject to follow as well. And then within that, we also have our own system-wide policy for how we kind of do our compliance work through the state and federal law with some level of consistency, though if I've learned anything over my time of doing this work, it's that each case is completely unique. even if it's between my institution and another UC campus and with the same tribe, each interaction and situation is unique in different ways. So, my campus has kind of a structure that is different than all of the other campuses. There is a team on each campus, and I'll get into that a little bit. So each campus has its own repatriation kind of designated team. And then, I in particular sit administratively within the museum on campus. So we too have our own policies and procedures. So that's about 5 layers of, laws and policies that shape our work. And I think this kind of makes the work different in some ways than repatriation, maybe internationally or between nations, where there isn't kind of this set of kind of guidelines and laws that you're navigating. I did go over this a bit, but these are just the actual laws and kind of regulations. If anyone's interested, you can also find our UC system policies around compliance with NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA online, if anyone is interested in seeing what that looks like. But just very quickly, we specifically at UC have this kind of added structure on top of our required state and federal law compliance. So we have a system-wide oversight committee that kind of all of our policies and procedures kind of go through this committee. This would be, I think, the body where any dispute resolution would kind of go through. And then we also have a system-wide repatriation coordinator that we all kind of work with to keep our dialogue between campuses going and make sure that we're kind of coming up with the sustainable system-wide solutions to challenges that come up. And then within each campus, there's a chancellor's designee. So this will be the person that is sort of the highest decision maker on each campus for NAGPRA compliance. There's a point of contact and then a repatriation coordinator, which are often the same person, but sometimes not. And then each campus has its own oversight committee as well. And this committee is generally comprised of 50% University of California representatives who have the appropriate kind of experience and subject matter to kind of participate in this oversight. And then the other 50% are tribal representatives. So a little bit of background on the Fowler Museum specifically. So the Fowler Museum was designated kind of early on in NAGPRA compliance terms. That would have been the 90s, as the kind of unit on campus that was responsible for undertaking NAGPRA compliance. So what that meant was that a lot of kind of system-wide searching took place to find any ancestors or cultural items that would have been subject to NAGPRA and brought under the umbrella of the museum to do that work. So the Fowler Museum has kind of been responsible for this over the years. And because of a few individuals and leaders in this, I think UCLA has had a lot of successes and has sort of shaped some of the best practices that we all utilize now. The Fowler Museum specifically is a historic and contemporary global arts and culture museum. So our collection emphasis is Africa, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. We hold about 130,000 works and cultural objects. And it's only a small percentage of those that actually are NAGPRA eligible coming from the United States. We also, under the umbrella of the Fowler Museum are, I would say, probably less now than 1,020 accessioned archaeological collections, but that was the highest number that we got to. So only 60% of these are really NAGPRA eligible in the sense that they are controlled or owned by the University of California Regents. The rest are either not from within the US, so they don't fall under NAGPRA, or they are controlled by other agencies. So that would mean that they could be NAGPRA eligible, but it's not UC's legal responsibility to do the NAGPRA compliance. That would be the controller. So it may be a national forest collection. It might be a state agency like Caltrans or something. Since UCLA has historically served as a curation repository for archaeological collections over the years, that is kind of one part of the collections that our team cares for on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, like I said, UCLA has had a lot of success and movement on repatriation in the past. So we are getting down to our last 1% or so of ancestors who need to be repatriated. There are, of course, there's still lots of work to do. You know, NAGPRA has many categories. Ancestors and funerary objects are just, you know, 2 of the categories. So we continue to work on our compliance on holdings that might fall into other categories. And that is primarily our focus at this point. So one of the challenges I wanted to highlight today is that our land grant institution, being on the Gabrielina Tongva land, we aren't actually able to directly repatriate to Gabrielina Tongva tribes, which, you know, I think it's fair to say that we have repatriated to them, certainly, and we continue to do so, but given sort of the several layers of laws and policies that I kind of highlighted at the beginning, we can't actually directly do that. So there's never a point where we can just identify what's Tongva and sort of use the legal channels that we have available to us to directly repatriate to them. It has to look a little different. And I would say the main reason for that is because the Gabrielina Tongva and also Tataviam tribes, who are kind of neighboring, they're not federally recognized by the US government. So that means that federal NAGPRA law doesn't apply to them, and they don't have any rights under NAGPRA to make claims and have anything repatriated to them. So like I said, that doesn't mean that we haven't done so. It means that we haven't been able to do so directly. And I do think it's notable, given that UCLA is a land grant institution. You know, these are Tongva lands that our university sits on, that we all work and possibly live on, depending on how close to campus you are. So, you know, it's one of those ethical dilemmas that I think is worth talking about as a limitation of the NAGPRA climate that we work within. So one of the ways that we were able to previously do this is there was a section of NAGPRA, a process within NAGPRA, I think might be a better way to describe it, where you were able to basically deem ancestors or associated funerary items as culturally unidentifiable. So what that basically meant, and I'll give you some example of language here. This is an example of a notice where we were basically disclosing in a Federal Register notice. So this is a public sort of document that gets published, that, let me see, the Fowler Museum has completed an inventory of human remains and associated funerary objects in consultation with appropriate Indian tribes or Native Hawaiian organizations, and has determined that there is no cultural affiliation between the human remains and associated funerary objects and any present-day Indian tribes or Native Hawaiian organizations. So I guess this specific notice here is for human remains that were Tongva and were eventually repatriated to them. But in doing that, within this process, we had to kind of make this public disclosure that they weren't related to them, which is because, as defined by NAGPRA, Indian tribes or Native Hawaiian organizations have very specifically defined meanings, and Indian tribes in the context of NAGPRA only means federally recognized tribes. But as I mentioned, Tongva, Gabrielino Tongva tribes aren't federally recognized. So we have to kind of make this disclosure that there's no relation there as part of the process. And basically what that meant was we had to have a sort of large-scale collaborative effort where federally recognized tribes had to get involved and did step up. And it was a big collaborative effort between the federally recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes to make sure that the ancestors from the non-federally recognized tribes went home and were able to get reburied. So, you know, ethically, I would say it's not a great administrative hoop that you have to jump through, in the sense that you end up kind of doing your own form of erasure in some sense by having to disclose that a non-federally recognized tribe, you know, has no relation to their people, their ancestors that you're trying to send home. But you know, it's one of those moments where you kind of keep your eyes on the goal and you do what you have to do to ensure that you know, you're ethically ending up in the right place. But the process itself can be difficult and problematic in its own right. So things have changed a little bit since that kind of repatriation took place. The culturally identifiable category has been removed, so that avenue is not really kind of available to us, but we continue to work collaboratively with the tribes in the area to, you know, to make sure that all of the ancestors and associated funerary belongings are all going back and being able to be reburied as necessary. But it does mean that we have to kind of work extra legally, in a sense, and we have to kind of encourage tribes to work together, tribe to tribe, which, you know, isn't necessarily UC's decision to make, but we you know, try to facilitate these conversations as best we can. So you know, CalNAGPRA is has been around for a few years now in its most current iteration. So that does give tribes within California who may not be federally recognized some rights. For example, you know, they do get to kind of get in on the consultation phase of NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA. We do take these processes up concurrently, but the way that CalNAGPRA was structured, which I can't get fully into in the time we have today, but the way that it was structured is very similar to NAGPRA. So that has resulted in a lot of similar language that often come into conflict with one another. So, you know, in cases where state and federal law are in conflict, the federal law takes precedence. So we kind of take each process as far as it can go simultaneously until there has to be a legal resolution one way or the other. And, you know, this is kind of something we're all actively trying to navigate, but it does shape our conversations quite a lot. So just some quick takeaways. This was like the probably fastest, most nutshell version of the work that we do and some of the challenges we're up against. But, I think it's fair to say that there are some upsides to having kind of all these layers of law and policy and procedure that we have to work within. The process is quite clear. It's very outlined, especially when it comes to repatriating to federally recognized tribes within the U.S. That track is very clear. But, being in California specifically, there are many non-federally recognized tribes that it becomes a little bit more complicated to navigate. But UC is committed to figuring that out. So that is something that we are actively kind of trying to push forward as best we can. I think that one of the reasons my presentation today was a little bit more limited to kind of conceptual or legal discussion about the work is because a lot of these repatriations are silent repatriations by tribal preference. I think that's kind of I like the way that you phrase that, Christos, in your presentation, the concept of a silent repatriation, because, I think the Fowler's been able to facilitate a lot of repatriations in the last few years internationally that didn't have to be silent. And that was the kind of the choice of the receiving communities to have more of a celebratory sort of reception around their repatriations. But, often in working in NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA, the tribes choose for these processes to be very confidential. They're often very painful. And I think maybe this kind of example that I briefly went over about the difficulty of working with non-federally recognized tribes is one way that it can be kind of painful because we aren't able to fully acknowledge their sovereignty in a way that we'd like to, given the political climate that we're working within. So that is a big challenge for us. That I think probably has many strategies, and it kind of depends on who you're working with. But yeah, I think I'll end there since I probably went over my 15-ish. Looking forward to questions. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Just underscores the complexities, both positive and negative, of these different layers you were talking about. Yeah. I had a set of questions, but I know the audience probably has many, so I'm going to step aside and Alfredo, do you want to put the call out for questions, and we can?
Yes, I can take the question. I think there is a first question from Guadalupe. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Alfredo. Yeah, I've been passionate about this presentation because I had the chance to work in a university museum in the US. I'm not disclosing the name, but I was commissioned by the FBI in that moment to do the research because there was a big looter in New York that they caught him, and it was like these antiquities from India and Nepal, Russian. So I was doing the research in the museum, supposedly of 40 objects coming from this looter. And 9 months later, I found 960 that were accessioned through many branches of names and different donors. And it was obviously something that was a dubious provenance. No one said anything. The accessions were, approved. And well, I just commenting this because I find it, to me, was very difficult to move around this. I didn't have legally support to address the situation because I was finding more and more, and the accessioning prices were rising every year. So it was also an IRS thing, these donations. And at the end, I I submitted the list with the pictures, the identified objects in the storage room to the FBI. I don't know what happened, if there was a repatriation, but it was a small university museum.
Yeah.
And I find these encyclopedic collections very troubled. Probably everywhere, but I was working in the US. Most of the objects the provenance is not clear. I was able to research on the Mexican, pieces, pre-Hispanic, because I am Mexican. And I found it so problematic, It's interesting because in Mexico, 1960 was the ban of the antiquities going out of the country. And all the accessionings by chance were December 31st, 1959. And you're like, who is accessioning pieces on December 31st, Just to whitewash these dubious subjects. But it's just a contribution to your
Wonderful. I know the collection you're talking about. I think once that arrest happened, 3 objects immediately came back to Kathmandu. We are very excited about that. But the rest of the list, I know the list you're talking about. Probably I can see your writings there now. I can probably guess. But it's quite interesting to see the whole list, you see. But I believe Manhattan Police is still investigating on that collection. But I heard at one point some of the artifacts and objects were supposed to come back to Nepal, but not sure 100% when that is going to happen. But I know that the collection. I've seen the list of the objects that was listed in that was listed as Nepal. Some of them they're probably not, probably India, but majority of them are Nepal from that list. So it will be quite interesting what happens with that particular collection.
Yeah, but I think as curators, we face it. We have to know how to deal with it. There's a need of more legal frame for us to know what is our due process to do. I found myself locked in a room with no disclosure agreement. I couldn't talk to anyone, working isolated, without anything I could do. There should be more legal advice for curators, because we deal with it all the time. The collections are kind of problematic mostly everywhere.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Sorry, there is Elke has another question.
Yeah.
Can you come in, Elke?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you see me? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank dear Kwon for this initiative of this webinar. Thank you for giving your expertise, inviting this dear colleagues, and thank you to Alfredo and the entire team. And thank you to all the 3 speakers, especially Christos. I really would like to say Epharistopouli for your wonderful research. That's so I really have to value this. It's so important, right? And I'm a curator of contemporary art, but I was working in the international art field for decades, and I was also part of a delegacy which brought back looted objects from a museum in Stuttgart, southern part of Germany, to Namibia, right, which is a colonial relationship, and they were looted. And so I could feel also the emotional part of this repatriation. And therefore, I'm so thankful for this afternoon or evening. And especially, I also would like to thank Roshan Mishra for his perspective he brought in, that the objects are not objects. They are living parts of a living culture, of rituals which are important for different communities. And therefore, I would ask if we can maybe also think about a legal role of objects. That New Zealand was able to give a legal role to a river, for example. I was working on this topic also curatorial wise. But I was wondering, there must be also some maybe possibilities to speak with people from law, from justice, and so on, to speak about a legal role, if we can claim for a legal role of artifacts, which are so important in a cultural environment, such as you described. So I could really feel what is missing there, especially if you traveled a lot, or I traveled a lot to other countries as well. So I could really feel the color of the, the paintings of the deities and so on. It's so important, it's really part of an experience,
Yeah.
And then I also would like to thank Alison for your presentation. That was really interesting, and I could really feel the pressure you are working under, the pressure and the violence, honestly, of administration. I could really feel you, and I could feel the new kind of violence, this first, when you read about colonization, all this like really truly very hurtful, painful violence, what happened. And then I could really re-feel it when you spoke, that you have to see what kind of law layer you are working with, la, la, la. But what about the people? And of course I could listen, I could feel you, you were speaking about this, but I also could feel the violence still in this administration. And I'm very sad about this. And I hope that we can go through this wall of, protection or whatever it is, And that's why it's so important to speak about this longing and belonging aspect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Elke, for your comments. And Guadalupe as
Alfredo,
well.
may I make a quick comment?
Please
I
do.
would like to, yes, thank you. I would like to thank Elke for the nice comments to all of us. And I want to add that if I'm not mistaken, it was very recently acknowledged and have been identified as a legal entity, a big site in New Zealand that includes a mountain as well. So that is in connection to what you said, indeed is taking place in various places around the world. And of course, we need to see it tested when it comes to objects themselves and objects that are stolen and being repatriated, to see how can this stand and if successful and so on. But it started happening, and indeed is happening, and that is an example in New Zealand. The other thing I'm getting the opportunity to add to the previous comment of Guadalupe, how curators in various museums, they are facing these problems that they do not have support, legal or others, update or knowledge on how to deal with these cases. This is something that I have long advocated, and I have published to a paper called The Antiquities Market We Deserve. You can search and find it and read it, this piece. Amending this piece, I'm starting with a gallery, and how many times it was busted with illicit antiquities and still allowed to be operated, but amending this piece, saying that there are huge gaps in archaeology and provenance research, and in terms of forensic archaeology, we are experiencing amazingly huge gaps that any other discipline doesn't experience, especially in academic setting. For example, there is still not even a single chair around the world in any university, even in the countries that have been affected, the so-called countries of origin, that have been affected by looting and theft of their own cultural heritage. Even in these countries, there is not a single academic chair purely dedicated in antiquities trafficking to teach students of this and other countries and prepare the future generation of curators, of researchers, of archaeologists, of museum personnel, of anyone who is going to get in touch sooner or later, at least once in their life, with at least one case of unprovenance of stolen object. They need to gain the knowledge, to be taught what are their rights, what are their framework in working, in researching, in reporting, in recording all this information, and their responsibilities as well. People are finding their way as they go, unfortunately, because there is this huge gap, and there is no care by any university around the world to create this. And there is a reason for that, and the reason is that the universities largely are being funded by wealthy people who are being recognized as benefactors of the university, but at the same time, either themselves or other people in their circle, they are collectors of these objects as well. And they are contributing to the university museums at the same time, and they are sitting at the boards of these museums. And therefore, no university wants to go against their own benefactor sooner or later to support the research that will backfire on them on monetary values, on monetary issues. So it's all about money that they don't do it with, still accompanied by very low ethical standards. And that is the reason why we do not have this, and we do not have also a single institution around the world to host and hold and give the chance in long-term research of all these experts, different kinds of research in different kinds of cultural heritage around the world, not only to academics, to researchers, to policemen, to curators, to all kinds, archaeologists, all kinds of people who have contributed to with their research. There is not even a single institution, not even a single chair. Thank you. I didn't want to take more time.
Can I just chime in really quick?
Of course.
I just wanted
Yes,
to
please.
add,
Come in, Alison.
UCLA does have a budding program that you just described. It's called the Way Station Initiative. It's under the Coates Institute of Archaeology. I think they might be in their second or third year at this point, but it is a graduate level certificate program. Often the students are in, archaeology, art history, or the conservation program, and are learning about provenance and problematic object histories and just what you described. So I would encourage you to look into it and reach out to them, because it's a great program, and they are they're putting in the work to grow it. So.
Good to hear. Yes, thank you.
There are many universities. I am teaching here in Cambridge at the Sustainable Heritage Master's course every year since 2012. There are many courses, either in undergraduate or graduate levels around the world, more or less about cultural heritage, but there is not even a single one, I was very specific, a single one dedicated in antiquities trafficking. On that, they contribute with a couple of lectures here and there. I do the same here in Cambridge, but it is dedicated. All these courses are dedicated to something else, cultural heritage related, rather than antiquities trafficking purely, and teaching the issue to the people concerned. Provenance also is being contributed to various courses around the world in various universities, but here and there, or sometimes more dedicated, but not fully, but nothing on antiquities trafficking.
Thank you so much to all of you. Is there any other final question? We can accommodate one more question. If there is, show up your hands or just unmute yourself and speak.
Just quickly, could you drop your contact information? I have Christos, but I don't have Roshan or Alison or Koan. Is it available somewhere?
Yeah, it's on the first page of my presentation. Yeah, the emails are there. And also we can send them to you.
Yeah, you can send it to them.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
No,
Fantastic. I just wanted to thank you so much, actually, to the participants and the speakers and KJ to have put together this fascinating and super important and timely webinar, very much so, and Christos Tsirogiannis and Roshan Mishra and Alison Fisher-Olson.
Yeah.
It has been really, really an honor to hear your perspective and your work. Keep doing it because we need it. And also as a curators, as a curator network, I think we really need to be right on the ball on this one because it's super important. KJ, do you want to kind of comment on something before wrapping up the webinar?
Yeah, I was going to say, in that kind of rushed presentation I did for the sake of having the speakers heard, I did include websites on each of those, and this is recorded, so you can refer to that. And also, if you reach out to each of us, I'm sure we'd be happy to provide that information as well. But there were links to, Roshan's organization, to the virtual museums. All of those, I had included the websites associated with those resources for curators.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Just before logging out, just a quick reminder, the next webinar, next IKT webinar, the fourth and last for the first series of Open Call, is on curating disability, challenges and opportunities for the inclusive museum. It will run Monday, the 12th of January, 2026, and is a practical look of how artists and curators who self-identify as disabled are entering the mainstream, curatorial approaches, barriers faced by artists, curators, and audiences. The registration for this webinar will open in early December. And last, the open call for the next series of webinar proposals, which are actually funded by the IKT. Just to remind, it's now open. You can access the link on the website, on the social media, or through our newsletter. The deadline is the 1st of December, so there is still 3 weeks, a bit more actually, to go. And the eligibility is all for all IKT members, so not candidates, but IKT actual members. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Carolina Bailey-Hughes, for organizing this one. And thank you to all speakers and all members to attend this webinar. Have a good day, night, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.